Hey, my name is Levi, and today I'll be talking about my episode of choice, episode 390, titled Objects of Revolution. I do have a script with me because I don't remember any of the things I wrote down, and I am so sorry if there's any background noise. But let's get started. Okay. Like I said, this episode is titled Objects of Revolution, and it did have a guest named Ashley White. She is an associate professor of history at the University of Miami in Florida. She mainly studies objects related to the French, American, and Haitian revolutions. As to why I chose this episode, it is because I like to see the smaller details which make a bigger impact. Like how in fashion, it has been used to and still is a way to make a political statement. Punk fashion is well known for being very anti-fascist, while on the other hand, you have hippie fashion, which they have a more pacifist, peace and love kind of vibe to their clothing. This episode begins with having Professor White talk about the connection between the American, French, and Haitian revolutions, but that is not what I'll be focusing on today. Rather, it's the next thing that they talk about, which I will be looking at, which is material culture. But what is that exactly? Professor White describes it as how people communicate with one another, since a lot of people were not literate, meaning they did not know how to read or write. Things like ceramics and clothing were a way that people communicated with one another. You may notice how some objects have changed meaning. Take a mouse, for example. When you hear the word mouse, you may not think of an animal at first, but instead you might think of a computer mouse because we are more accustomed to seeing them. But going back to the podcast, the object that they first mention is the No Stamp Act teapot. But to refresh your memory, the Stamp Act was when Britain taxed anything and everything that had to do with the stamp on it in order to pay back for the 7-Year War. Things like newspaper, pamphlets, and any other stuff that had a stamp were heavily taxed, and as a way to go against Britain, the colonies protested and boycotted a lot of British goods. This then caused the British Parliament to remove the Stamp Act, hence creating the No Stamp Act teapot. This item was considered pretty rare because not a lot of people were creating teapots to begin with. Professor White believed that everyday wear would have been a more accessible form of revolution that could have been passed down to the next generations. The alternative they talked about were cockades. As said in the podcast, these are, quote, small rosettes, usually of ribbon, something that can easily be sewn, end quote. Ribbon wasn't considered expensive and was already being used on a lot of their clothing in the late 18th century. This ribbon would be seen on elite people, but also on enslaved people when they were able to buy the ribbon. These cockades were something that would be small enough to still be visible, and people were able to easily put them on and take them back off. Because of this, a lot of people use this as a way to signify their political standpoint, but they quickly became controversial because they were still associated with the military during this time. Although there are many other points towards the end of this podcast, I'm only going to be focusing on the objects because only 4 minutes were given for this assignment. So I'll go ahead and stop the summary here and move on to the main question, which was, in what ways does this author's work help us understand life in early America before the Civil War? The host and guest do bring up how life was during the 3 revolutions, being the French, Haitian, and American, but I will only be talking about the American Revolution, given this is a U.S. course. Before and during the American Revolution, they talked about how objects cultivated many different meanings. It is especially seen in cockades and how they were used to signify political standpoints, but quickly got changed back to military just because they didn't want to associate the same two. But I do believe we will continue to see significance in objects even in the Civil War and just throughout history in general. As we go through this course, there will still be objects, and we can even see it today in how chaotic it's been, not just in the US, but throughout the whole world. I still believe there will be a meaning behind these objects and more of a push for a change. And I'll leave my video at that. I want to say thank you for listening to my rant about another person's rant. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Maybe one day in the near future, you'll be the one to use an object to stand up for a cause that you believe in. Bye.